La luz, la materia y la experiencia sensorial. Autor de proyectos emblemáticos en Asia, Europa y América. Demos la bienvenida a Stephen Hall. Les invitamos a tomar sus asientos.
When it starts, it's this one.
Is this one?
Yeah. If for whatever reason.
It can go this way?
Yeah, it should. See? Yeah, it does. If you'd rather do.
Yeah, but it's not full screen, huh?
No, it is. Okay.
All right.
Good luck.
It's a pleasure to be here today with all the luminaries. I have to say, whenever I come to Mexico, I think of Octavio Paz. Paz, the poet, was the Adolf Loos of Mexican poets. I saw him in person read at the 92nd Street Y in New York City many years ago. He read his Labyrinth of Solitude. It was luminous, lighting up the Manhattan, connecting urgent modernity to the monumental art that drives architecture of the great Aztecs. His poem, I Speak of the City, frames urban life in psychological modern dynamic. He was a poet of ideas. And my title today, Imaginary Causes, is about ideas driving design. My book, Anchoring, in 1989, was an argument that all architecture should be anchored in the site, the history, urban geography. And then in 1993, we wrote Questions of Perception with Johanni Palasma, arguing for the phenomenology that is the experiential dimension of architecture. So this is basically a lecture that I made just for today. It's an experiment, and it's a question. What is architecture? Friends of mine who are very famous said architecture is a service, but to me, a service to clients easily translates into a successful business. I've heard architects say, architecture is solving problems. My good friend Lebbeus Wood said, no, architects make problems. Imaginary causes, it's really about what is the idea that drives the design. Yet, the real experience of architecture is where it's either successful or not. So this lecture is going to be only about the ideas. And like I say, I made it for today, so it's an experimental talk. Let's see. So it starts in 1977, Bronx Gymnasium Bridge, a project imagining how people bound in the Bronx could fight their way out. And we imagined a thing called long basketball. You could see it up there, where the basketball court would be stretched to fit into the bridge. And a year later, we did the Bridge of Houses, which was the idea of all the different ways that people can live. There were SRO housing, there was luxury housing, there was dormitories. Different kinds of people live. And the idea of taking that High Line and turning it into a public promenade. And by the way, that was the first instance that anybody ever thought of that, and now it's one of the great things in New York. We built models, had exhibitions about it. 2 years later, I had a chance to make a house on Martha's Vineyard, and I read Moby Dick, where Herman Melville describes a skeleton, a whale skeleton, that is on the beach, and the Indians of Martha's Vineyard draped skin and bark over it and lived in it. That became the metaphor, the idea that drove the design for the Martha's Vineyard house. In 1988, we won the Berlin Gedenkbibliothek, and the idea was to jump over the original building, the 1950 building. So the entire building became a browsing circuit to activate the composite. In the 80s, the late 80s and 90s, I did a series of projects called Edge of a City. It was really about the problem in the American landscape. We have enormous, terrible sprawl outside of many cities, in fact, most of them. And we really want to densify, and then we want to scrape the landscape of the suburban sprawl and make dense pack elements. So each city had a different response. For example, in Phoenix, Arizona, we stopped the sprawl into the desert with this line that we called spatial retaining bars. And they were concrete building that had living, working, recreation, public courtyard, everything in this line of strange architecture that would look out on the desert. In Dallas, Texas, we did spiroid sectors. Again, scraping the suburban sprawl, dense pack developments, restoring the landscape, wilding the landscape, which is now so important. Now we talk about it, but this is back in 1990. Then we were invited by Izusaki to make housing in Fukuoka. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? I won't be able to control it. So I have a single pair of ideas, void space and hinge space. The hinge space is about Fusuma and Tsujimi, about the Japanese tradition of movable walls, but we were making it hinged. And the void space is the division of the entire block into 4 water gardens. And there you can see the model, and it's a very successful project. We were commissioned to do a house in Texas by a very idealistic client, Charles Price, and his father had built the Price Tower in Oklahoma, Frank Lloyd Wright's only skyscraper. So I was really faced with what would be the idea that would drive this design? And they took me to the site, and I said, that site doesn't work. I need more space. And the next morning, they drove me out to a place where there was a stream, and there was a series of dams. And I thought, this house can be about stretto, a piece of music where stretto is about moving from one stage to another. And we made the whole house about this piece of music. The music by Bela Bartok is in 4 parts, where the lightweight is divided from the heavyweight. So the whole house is in 4 solid concrete block pavilions and lightweight steel moving between. And the last room is a flooded room where the water comes right back. I had very idealistic clients, and they built this house. Almost the same year, I was invited to do the project for Palazzo del Cinema. Very important project, competition that was covered in Domus. Every architect got something like 3 pages, every entry. There was James Sterling, Aldo Rossi, Jean Nouvel. My idea was cinema is the most powerful form today. You can take what happens in 10 years and condense it to a 1-hour film. You can take what happens in 1 minute and stretch it into a 1-hour film. So that concept of a kind of almost an accordion of stretching and expansion about time became the way to do the architecture. And yeah, it was a project which to me was very important. It was a seminal project in my life because at that moment I was kind of unknown, 1990, and we were then invited to do the competition in Kiasma, Helsinki. Great opportunity. In that case, I went to the site and I imagined this intertwining, the idea that the entire building is a kind of intertwining knot. And that was coming from Merleau-Ponty's writings. The last book that Merleau-Ponty wrote was The Invisible and the Visible. And in the last chapter, there's a chapter called the chiasm, the intertwining. And the building was actually named Chiasma, and it comes from Merleau-Ponty. It's been restored today. It's in really good shape. All the galleries have natural light. I'm very proud of that project. In about 2 years after that, we were invited to do an entire block in the city of Makuhari, right outside of Tokyo. And I said, oh my God, I have to have an idea. This is a big project. What's going to drive this design? And I was thinking of the journey to the north of Basho, the great Japanese poet. And then in this poem, he's moving from these pavilions and these different places. And I thought of the whole block as this journey, so that it forms garden spaces. But then there were these crazy little pavilions that were each dedicated to a chapter. And the whole block is an exoskeletal concrete structure. It's a very successful project. It's still there today. This is a couple of years earlier. This was 8 years in design. I think architecture takes a long time. And this was the addition to Eero Saarinen and Elio Saarinen's project at Cranbrook for the Cranbrook Institute of Science. So we worked on this thing for like 6 months. And the idea that we had was Edward Lawrence, a great scientist. He had this notion of the strange attractor. He said it's like a fly moving through space. It can circle, but it will never follow exactly the same path. And that little drawing right there was the concept drawing. You can see, I did it with my ex-wife. I think her initials are on it. Anyway, you can see that's the model. And it's still functioning very well today as the Cranbrook Institute of Science. One of my most important projects, which is in great shape today, is the Chapel of St. Ignatius. That was a struggle. First of all, I'm not Catholic, I'm certainly not Jesuit. I told them I believe in the power of architecture to make really sacred space. And I think I got the project because of my book, Questions of Perception. The interview was in 1993, and it just so happened that I went to the University of Washington, and my professor Punt brought all the students to see my life. Every architect who was being interviewed had to give a lecture, and I gave a lecture about questions of perception. Anyway, the Jesuits really have a way of thinking that way about materiality, light, detail, texture. So this notion of 7 bottles of light in a stone box really was translated into the narthex, the Blessed Sacrament, the choir, all the different liturgical parts of that building. And it was a long process. That it really is a concept driving the design. It's the idea of an imaginary moment that then follows through the whole design. And it's a project really also about light and experience. So going back to that point, you can have an idea that drives a design, but it doesn't necessarily need to be understood by the people who experience the space. They can feel the light. They can feel the power of the architecture, the phenomena. And that's the point. But how do you get there? The problem with phenomenology is it doesn't have an a priori. I always have this argument with philosophers. They say, well, you're doing something, ideas. You're driving the design with ideas. So this is the conundrum. The idea that drove the design for the Lake Whitney water treatment plant. This is a huge water treatment plant just north of New Haven. And I made this sketch. I said, let's put it all underground and make a gigantic garden out of this treatment. There's all these tubs and tanks and things that have to be dealt with. And I made this kind of water drip. Maybe it's slightly corny, but everybody followed. All the engineers followed me, and it's the largest green roof in the state of Connecticut. I think the point about imaginary causes also is if you can get the team and the engineers and everybody to follow you, you can really realize pretty extraordinary architectural projects. But you can't do it from just the pragmatics of the problem. When we worked in Norway, my father was full-blooded Norwegian, so this is a project very close to my heart. And when we worked there, it was the Knut Hamsun center, the museum for the great writer Knut Hamsun. And I had read his book, Hunger, when I was in high school. And it's really about a body where invisible forces, psychological forces, are ripping at the body. So we made this diagram of a body where these invisible forces are acting on it. And so each of these balconies has something to do with this novel hunger and the idea of Knut Hamsun. So we produced the design, and then there was a huge controversy, and nothing happened for many years. We won a Progressive Architecture Award. The models are in the Museum of Modern Art, and I thought it will never be built. But then some Norwegian who was really proud came from Narvik, and he said, I'm going to the government, and we're going to get this funded and get it built. And he did, and it opened. And it's been a great experience. It's still functioning very well. I think Iwan Bond showed it in his lecture. This was a project for a social housing company on Sarfatistraat in Amsterdam. And it was a program where they want to add a pavilion on the back of this brick building, 17th, 18th century. And I'm trying to think of an idea that I can unify what's going on, all these offices, and then the main space has no particular function. They want to have their Christmas parties there, we want to have meetings there. So there was a pair of ideas. There was a piece of music by Morton Feldman called Patterns in a Chromatic Field. And then there was the idea of a Menger sponge that has the same elevation and plan and section. And what's really interesting is because of all this porosity, this is all perforated copper, where the color fields are organized and actually located by a chance operation like Morton Feldman used to make his music. That also gave us an enormously acoustic space. So you can have meetings in the corner, the different people that work there can have meetings in various places all around this building. So this crazy, beginning with this imaginary thought of a piece of music and a Menger sponge coming together, organized something that was very, very original. I went to the site, this was 1997. There was a house. I had a client who wanted a kind of New York loft up in the mountains, north of New York, 4 hours north of New York. So I thought about, in fact, I found a stick on the ground, a kind of forked stick, and I thought about a why, but I thought about, there's this idea of the house, the upside-down house, where you have all the public functions on the low level and the sleeping up above. And I thought about a why could flip that. So on one side, you have the public functions above and the sleeping below. On the other side, you have the sleeping above, the public functions below. So it became a concept that could be used and in a way organized, and it was very fruitful. It's still there. It's been purchased by a strange man from Italy who, it was for sale for $2.6 million. And he was looking online and he bought it. He sent his brother up to look at it and he bought it online. Anyway, he comes there about 3 times a year. Ludvico, he's a fantastic new client that's reoccupying my White House. For the Pratt School of Architecture, the center of the building had burned down and we had to make a new entrance. So I took the thought of pulling the floors from these 2 buildings, pull them horizontally so they have a dissonant zone right in the middle. So all the floors of the building on the right, which I think is from 1850, and the one on the left is from 1860, these dark lines come through and form a dissonant zone. So there's this kind of imaginative concept, and then that just following that through, and it's still there. It's the School of Architecture. I was given the chance to make a big dormitory, like 350 rooms at MIT, and the problem was complex and the timing was very short, but we had the idea of porosity, that the building would be a complete porous thing, and the public areas would be connected almost like a carving out. So the 10 floors, and then there's a kind of carving out. I got the commission because I told the chancellor, I said, Vassar Street shouldn't be a brick wall. They had a master plan, which was a brick wall that went down Vassar Street. And I thought, that's really terrible. And I said, listen, we were being interviewed. There were like 3 architects in the final round. And I said, it was Chancellor Bacco. I said, listen, we would like to do a new master plan. I mean, can you give us 6 weeks. Anyway, he said yes. Then I made a master plan for the whole of Vassar Street that every building would be porous. So you have the horizontal porosity, then you have the vertical porosity, the all-over porosity. Anyway, and then we ended up building the all-over porosity, which is still functioning very well. We were just there. My wife, Demetra, who's a great architect, sitting back there, a great collaborator. We were just visiting there with our kids, and the kids loved it, and everybody living there. It's been, 15 years. When I was invited to do the competition for the Nelson-Atkins Museum, all the architects were supposed to build on the north side of the building, which is on the right hand. You see that black, that's a 1933 neoclassical building. And they were directed to build on the north side. And I said, we can't do that. That's not an ideal way to add on to this building. And when I went down on the landscape, refused their directive, and we were the only architect, by the way, that broke the rules. Tadawando slammed it right up against it. Potsdam Park slammed it right up against the north. Anyway, I said, I apologize, because in your stone facade, there's an inscription in your original stone facade that says the soul has greater need of the ideal than of the real. And I said, that's where I got the courage to break the laws, break the rules, and try this edition. And yeah, that was one of those moments where the idea that drives the design is really why you win the competition. You take risks. If you have an idea, you imagine something, you take risks, everybody follows you, and then you can do something you would never be able to do without that crazy, non-rational moment in the beginning. In the beginning of the project for the School of Art, and in the middle of America, in Iowa, very conservative place, Iowa, University of Iowa. But we were invited by very great people. Dorothy, the head of the art department, was really wanting a great building. So we had this thought of actually cantilevering the building out over the lagoon and making the whole building out of Corten steel, a planar construction. And it's still there today. And this idea of this planarity, folding up, going up, also gives a kind of way of dealing with the interior. So the stairs that move you through the building is a series of folding planes cascading down through the building. And then several years later, we were invited to do addition. It wasn't really an invitation. It was another competition against Diller Scofidio and a bunch of people. So we came to the site, and now, because I had built the first building over the lagoon, the great green space, a quadrangle, could be now given over to the art school, because there are going to be two parts. I won't tell you the whole story of the flooding and everything that happened that caused this to happen, but the point is, we had a struggle because Kenneth Frampton said, Stephen, you should build that in Corten like you built the first building. And I said, well, why? He said, well, it's a university. You should make everything, kind of coherent. Huh? And I tried so many schemes, and I didn't like it. And everybody in the office agreed we have to do something else. And then we said, okay, the first building was about planar construction. And the whole thing is an abstraction of plain, almost like cubist construction. And then the second building is volumetric. And it's made out of double layers, and it has a series of light cuts that bring light and organize social space in all parts of the building. So as you go down through the building, it's 300 feet by 300 feet, a very big project. And as you go down through the building, you have social space, and it's really a way of organizing everything. This is, by the way, is nearly a net zero building. It has geothermal heating and cooling, green roofs, many, many different aspects, but that's not what my talk is about. My talk is about the idea that drives the design. I had a client who came to me, this is ideal. He said, Stephen, I want you to build me a poetic utterance. I said, Alan, isn't there a program? He said, well, I'm a writer. I write books, and I live by myself. Sometimes I have a girlfriend over, but it's just a small house. I only have $350,000, but I want a poetic utterance. And he had a nail collection because on this site there was a series of square-headed nails from the 19th and 18th century in upstate New York. So I made the idea based on cartridge brass and nails that are exposed. And that became the kind of driving concept which he loved, and it's still there today. Sitting on this old site, there was a nail factory. It's in Essex, New York. That's the river that connects to Canada up there. I was invited to Beijing after we were invited by Izusaki to do the Nanjing Museum. I think it's in this. I was invited to do these 8 towers that were supposed to be just built according to the planning diagram. And they wanted to keep the sort of central space with a bunch of factories. They wanted to use them as art buildings. I said, listen, if you give us 3 months, we're going to do an ideal design for you, an ideal design. And they did. They gave us 3 months, and we proposed that these 8 buildings would be linked by these bridges. And the bridges would be full of functions like a swimming pool in one of them, and instead we tore down the old factory thing in the middle and we built a cinematheque and water gardens. Well, this is 2002, and you know, everything in China was happening for 2008. Everybody was very excited to do something really ambitious. So we presented this and I thought they'll never build it. It's too far out there. And about a month later, they sent an email. They said, we've looked at your project. You know, it had cinematheques, a nursery school, bridges with swimming pools. It greatly exceeds our budget. However, we want to build the whole thing. Don't take anything out, which was amazing. And that's how the linked hybrid got built. You know, actually, we have our office there in one of the areas. And this is the building that got me to China in the first place, and it was Izusaki inviting us to come, and I was a little bit frightened. I hadn't, by the way, if you go online, there's a whole video that explains this building in detail, this is to do a disservice to it, to just tell you that it was the notion of projecting axonometric of Chinese watercolors. Everything was black and white, and the idea of the projected space, that was organized. That's the idea that was organizing the building. And it's the kind of the head building there at that. It's an architecture exhibition, really, that in a park just outside of Nanjing. We entered a competition. This was for the Herning Museum in Herning, Denmark. And that year I was really nervous because I kind of ran out of time. And we actually did this competition very quickly. They had the greatest collection of Piero Manzoni, the great artist who used fabrics. There was a shirt factory on the site, and the owner of the shirt factory invited Piero Manzoni to come. So and you can see the shirt factory is that round thing over there in the corner. And I had this idea of just kind of shirt sleeves which are draped over the basic rectangle of the building and bring the light in a curve. And that was the idea that drove the design, and we won the competition. Holger Reinberg was a great client. Another competition we won that same year was in Biarritz for the Museum of the Surf and the Sea. And the notion was really that under the sky and under the sea, that the whole building would tilt and, you know, aim itself toward the ocean horizon. And it's a simple building, and there were like 8 competing architects, and we won it, and it's also there now in Biarritz today, my only building in France. We were invited, this was another competition, after the Beijing linked hybrid was under construction, we were invited to do a very large project for Vanke in Shenzhen, a headquarters, a hotel, their offices, apartments. And I thought, you know, it's right there on the sea, and I thought, why not just raise the entire building up to the height limit and just see just open up the whole landscape down below. It's like a floating, open up the whole landscape down below as a public space, a tropical landscape. And when I presented this project, the Wang Shu, the director of Vanke, there was a room with sort of 10 Chinese all around the table, and I was presenting the competition, and he said, I want to hear what everybody else thinks. And nobody that was around that room had the courage to say that they liked it. But when I got around to him, he said, I love this idea, and I love the shape, and he put his hand out like that. And that was it. I think I saw him 2 more times. We won the competition, and this is the kind of thing that was going on in China at the time. They got the building permit in 10 days. A building that's, elevated kind of 30 meters in the air. Anyway, that's a different lecture. Another project that was, the client came, and this is after we won the horizontal skyscraper. They came from Singapore, the capital land, and at first I said, I don't think we should do this. I'm really not fond of doing commercial work. They had a program where they built a shopping center, and they put a tower and a residential tower. And, it's so banal, and they've done it a number of times. They had 200 projects under construction in China when they asked me to do this design. 3 million square feet, it's the biggest project we ever did. And I said, no. And I made these watercolors. I said, what we want to do instead is an integral urban form that would have the housing, the hotel, the offices, but it would form a giant public space for everyone. And not only that, it would be geothermally heated and cooled, and it would have kind of micro-urbanism where the shops from the shopping mall would have fronts on the street all the way around. And the building had to be organized by these light shafts that are bringing light down to the adjacent housing. So once we made the diagram, it had to be sliced by these angles of light, and that's where I gave it the name sliced porosity block. It's an exoskeletal frame, so you're looking at the structure, not any skin, which I think is really wonderful because you have layouts that are very open. There's no columns, so all that structure is on the outside. And then we did these buildings within buildings. You see these cuts. And Lebbeus Wood's largest building that he ever did, the Light Pavilion, is on the right-hand side. Then in Princeton, we were given the chance to do the Lewis Center for the Arts. Very interesting project. It's basically the entrance to the Princeton campus. And I thought, let's make it in 3 parts, and each one with its own idea, because you have the music, you have the performance, you have theater and dance. So each section of this kind of U-shape has another idea driving it. And everything is all golden section proportions, which is something all of our work relates to. The proportioning of architecture is something to me is infinitely important. And there you see the model, the Lewis Center for the Arts, and that opened in 2017. And it's a long story. I could spend an hour giving a talk. This is a very important project, and I think also there's a video on that project if you're interested to watch it online. I had an interesting moment where a man came from me from Korea and asked for an ideal house. And he interviewed all these important New York architects. And I had a kind of crisis because it's an interesting urban site, but other than his basic program, he had the idea of a guest house, wanted a house and a guest house. But I didn't really have. In fact, I made a series of really bad, throwaway designs. And in the conference room in New York where we have our meetings, by the way, these ideas that drive the design, I don't have them alone at all. It's a process where we put things on the wall and we say, does this lead to anything meaningful? Is this a valid way to proceed? So there was no real good design for this. And I went into my office and I grabbed John Cage's book about composition. And we've been working on the architectonics of music for a few years. I showed you one project that was, the idea driving it was Morton Feldman's Pattern in a Chromatic Field. But this is a piece of composition by Anhalt that was done in 1969. And I took the diagram, the actual music diagram, and in order to make the diagram work, I needed 59 skylights. So there's the concept drawing, and there's the basic model, and it's a great project. And if you go to Seoul, Korea, he loves to show people this project. When we were invited to do the competition in Glasgow for the Glasgow School of Art, I looked at the great building by Macintosh, and I saw the structure is sort of light bones and heavy outside, heavy, thick masonry outside. And I said, we should reverse that. We'll make very light recycled glass outside and heavy, light tubes that support the building as the inside. These are driven voids of light, also a strange thought. And we won the competition, and that's a long story, but it's functioning very well right now in Glasgow. If you go to Glasgow, I was given the chance to do the Queen's Library, and it's a community library, and the site was very large. In fact, the whole library could have been built on one floor. But I said, listen, you know, one of the great things about this site is you see Manhattan. To give the public this fantastic view of Manhattan, you know, from Queens across the river, and it's situated right by Lou Kahn's last project, the FDR Memorial. And I thought, you've got to make it vertical. Anyway, it's a long story, but this idea of proceeding through the building, up the stairs, past the bookcases, children's library in these cuts, public space on the top, and it's still there and functioning very well in Queens. Down in Richmond, Virginia, a very conservative town, we were invited to do a project for the Institute for Contemporary Art. And there I went to Borges, the Garden of Forking Paths, a great book by Borges, which is a little bit about time. And the way I explained this project, I said, you know, today, this is a contemporary art museum. There's no grand narrative. You could say that in the abstract expressionist period, there was a grand narrative. You know, in Cubist period, there was a grand, but today, it's, you know, painters paint incredible things, sculptors are working, so there's no grand narrative. So it's a forking building, and that was realized and opened in 2018. And I'm running out of time. That's what's going to happen here. Look at that. So you'll have to look this up on my website. This is where we, again, refuse the competition rules. We tore down the Glasgow School of Art, put the parking all underground, and realized the Glasgow School and the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, again, breaking the rules was very important. And that the Kennedy Center, similar. They said you can't build it in the garden out there like that, but we did it. We broke the rules, and that was realized and opened in 2022. It's a fantastic. And the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, also a very important project against a number of illustrious architects, which we realized, again, with this not so crazy idea. And the Meander building, a housing building which is bounded by blocks all the way around, right? So instead of putting an urban, it was the idea that you could shape the space, shape these garden spaces all around this building. And that became, and this house, time's up. All right, I won't talk about it. That's a building that we jumped over in Ostrava. It's under construction. It's a music hall. And the point of the lecture, I think, is clear. And I'm sorry that there's too many buildings. And I just want to end with this because I started this in 2006. I had the idea of a dense pack. I said, let's just organize all these houses, and it's quite a big piece in Kaplankaya, Turkey. And we'll put some of them under the ground, some of them in the ground, some of them over the ground in 3 parts. And we presented the project. It's like really interesting because it's like a city. It has a chapel and a public space, and now they're building the whole thing. It's a very long story, but I'm very proud that that idea has been taken up by another developer after it sat for many years. So I'm still working on a project for 17 years, and my point there to end with is architecture takes time. Thank you.
Desde Seúl nos acompaña Min-Suk Cho, fundador de Mass Studies. Es uno de los arquitectos más relevantes de Corea del Sur, autor del Pabellón de Corea en la Bienal de Venecia 2014, galardonado con el León de Oro. Su trabajo combina investigación urbana, cultura y arquitectura contemporánea. Demos la bienvenida a Min-Suk Cho.
This works. Buenas noches a todos. It's wonderful to be back in Mexico City. Thank you, Michael Adria, for this second invitation. My last one was in 2010. Today, I'll share several recent projects that has happened since. There will be 7 of them. And these projects, they are diverse, but they reveal common threads, and they all grapple with challenging ground conditions. Much like this clip suggests metaphorically unexpected obstacles in constant flux, sometimes with barely any stable ground to do anything. Unlike this TV spectacle designed for entertainment, our ground challenges demand deeper purpose and commitment as they require substantial time and resources. Let's begin with the first one that is a more ambitious goal, world peace, for 19 buildings, 19 corner buildings, and this is building that we did not design. I curated a show called Cross-Eye View, the Korean Peninsula for the Venice Biennale Korean Pavilion. Remco, as a then director, mandated all national pavilions address the same theme, absorbing modernity from 1914 to 2014. I quickly realized that in 1914, South Korea did not exist. The entire peninsula was under the Japanese occupation. So presenting only South Korea's story would omit half the narrative. So I propose architecture first exhibition by both Koreas, examining 100 years of shared and separate histories. Knowing this exceeds my capabilities, I simultaneously developed Plan B, not directly by the 2 Koreas, but mediation through others with access to North Korea, ensuring we meet the strict June 2014 deadline, opening. After my proposal was selected, I uncovered the pavilion's remarkable backstory. It became the Giardini's final national pavilion in 1995, the Biennale Centennial. Despite competition from over 20 countries, Korea succeeded through connections forged after artist Nam Jun-baek's 1993 Golden Lion for Germany, involving then Venice Mayor Massimo Cacciari with architect Kim Seok-chul and Franco Mancuso. According to the late Kim Seok-chul, Mayor Cacciari was thrilled that the pavilion could serve both Koreas, a purpose transcending art and architecture toward world peace. This vision gained momentum when South Korea president agreed with the US President, then Clinton, to visit North Korea. Everything collapsed when Kim Il-sung, founder of North Korea, died in 1994, leaving both countries in an abrupt semi-crisis situation. I then understood why it was called Korea Pavilion, not the South Korea Pavilion. Unknowingly, I had inherited Nam Jun-baek's unfulfilled promise to the mayor of Venice. I pursued both Plan A and B, within the time frame, extensive correspondence with North Korea with the help of individuals like Pierre Neuber, former Vienna director, plus cultural institutions like Goethe Institute of Korea, South Italian Cultural Institute, and so on. This wasn't a traditional curating, it was more like a diplomatic process. 14 months of preparation process, I didn't abandon Plan A until 5 months before the opening. Through this process, I met fascinating people, filmmakers, photographers, writers, and so on with North Korean access who had created remarkable works. Plan A's byproduct became Plan B in a way, a major exhibition with 39 participants from 14 countries across disciplines engaging both Korea's architecture. What I envisioned as an intimate exchange between two neighboring countries became a showcase spanning continents and eras, expansive yet fragmented. Plan B required designing within the Korean pavilion's small, complex footprint. Unlike earlier pavilions in prominent Giardini locations asserting neoclassical or modernist autonomy, ours was a nearly invisible squeeze between Japan and Germany as it being pushed toward the lagoon, like the Korean peninsula itself, caught between land and water, between powerful neighbors. Rather than in a simple four-corner rectangular plan, it grafted onto former toilet facility. The plan had 19 corners and curved walls designed around to avoid touching existing trees. Instead of imposing free will, this architecture emerged from unexpected opportunities within intense constraints. The plan resembling the peninsula's famously complex rear style coastline became our narrative tool. Materials from both countries often appear on either side of corners, viewable together or separately, depending on viewpoints. With so much exhibition content, work spilled onto exterior walls, giving us 19 multiples 2, that's 38 corners. We kept installation minimum, using most funds to bring as many participants as possible to Venice. Our goal was more than an exhibition. We wanted to shape reality. Though direct North Korean exchange proved impossible, we wanted to bring together as many scattered Plan B participants as possible. The journey continued, perhaps the recognition helped. What was once taboo became accepted and frequent. This exhibition traveled to Seoul and New York with participants staying connected through conferences, symposiums, spawning additional shows and events and so on. But the most significant butterfly effect occurred a month after the opening. One participant, Milanese photographer Alessandro Belgiojoso, sent me a photo of an unannounced visit by North Korean ambassador to Rome, his daughter and secretary. Belgiojoso guided this stills tour, reported that the ambassador was very pleased with our exhibition. It allowed me to keep dreaming about the first Venice Biennale participation one day. Following Venice, I joined DMZ Dreaming of Earth project from 2015, an ambitious ongoing collaboration initiated by Korean artist Choi Jae-eun. She assembled diverse creative artists, architects, biologists, and scientists committed to protecting the DMZ's rich ecosystem and history. Collaborators include architect Shigeru Ban, Bijoy Jain, artists Ufan Lee, Olaf Eliasson, and Lee Bo, plus many scientists, DMZ Ecology Research Institute, and so on. Che commissioned us to imagine and envision a seed bank and ecology library as potential inter-Korean collaboration. We proposed repurposing one of the 4 tunnels North Korea excavated in the 1970s, now dark tourism destinations. Tunnel 2 would become our vault for life and knowledge, an analog archive for seeds and ecological knowledge. Our intervention began with a 10-meter excavation where 2 tragic man-made lines intersect, the border and tunnel. This acts as a landscape acupuncture, relieving territorial tension and restoring natural energy flow while making renewal. Granite rock blocks excavated from void would migrate gradually to both sides, north and south, forming a scale plinth for 2 preparation facilities, one housing the seed bank, the other one ecology library. This year, Che launched naturalrules.net, a beautifully designed platform documenting DMZ ecology extensively. You can check your phone. Visitors can purchase seed bombs for 70 cents each. Collective landscape nurturing through drone-facilitated DMZ reforestation. Che's retrospective open later this month at Seoul Museum of Art, and it will be a beautiful exhibition as well as compelling campaign. Let me briefly go back to Korean Pavilion in 2014. Among the exhibition images was Kim Jong-up's French embassy in Seoul. Though photographically unremarkable, architectural historians canonize this building as one of the Korean most significant 20th century modern work. Completed in 1961, it represents early work of Kim Jong-up, who spent 4 years with Le Corbusier in 1950s Paris. The original embassy ensemble crowned a gentle 15-meter hill as a cascading triptych, residence above, curved roof pavilion, and office annex. The pavilion's curved roof was most distinctive, clearly echoing the Le Corbusier's unbuilt governor's palace in Chandigarh, which Kim worked on. Yet, its abstract spherical surface carved into square plan also evokes traditional Korean roof profiles. Kim studied how Korean mountain temples engage topography, evident throughout the embassy ensemble. However, unlike the traditional temples that nestle modestly in valleys, this ensemble sits prominently on the hilltop. With Han River once visible 3 kilometers away, its positioning reflects the Corbusier's Acropolis ideal over Korean precedents, a unique fusion of influences that was. 60 years later, this French territory has grown haphazardly to increase capacity. The pavilion suffered significantly, nearing collapsing due to a poor construction quality, then tragically compromised when recreated in the 1970s, the reason why we couldn't obtain proper photograph for the Venice show. Both embassy ground and the surrounding city evokes from single-story wooden houses to 16-story towers. This transformed the former hilltop complex into one now nestled in an artificial valley, ironically creating conditions more aligned with the traditional Korean temple placement. In 2015, we collaborated with the Korean-French architect Yoon Tae-hoon and his Parisian firm Satie, winning the competition to restore the pavilion and add workspace 4 times larger than the original size. Our challenge, playing a supporting role through a much larger scale to this historically significant building. We introduced 2 elements. The unrecognizable annex become Lajite, 2-story, 60-meter horizontal building, maintaining the old annex sectional relationship. It houses public functions, visa services, meetings, and new exhibition space. Second, we designed a 10-story tower for high-security workspaces. This compact tower mediates between the original complex and the radically verticalized urban context, offering intermediate scale while enhancing exterior visibility. In plan, both new buildings relate to original structures in distinct directions. La Jetée adopts the same 4.5 meter square grid module as the original pavilion. The pavilion was completely rebuilt to identical original dimensions while embedding 4 central steel columns for seismic requirement. Roof was post-tension from above while preserving exact formwork finish below. We rely on not so many drawings and photos and movie clips and so on. After completion, Kim Jong-up's apprentices, now in their 70s and 80s, gathered for a ceremony where the French government officially designated the Kim Jong-up Pavilion. Building surviving 3 reconstructions over 62 years, within its context transformed from mountain to valley. Fourth challenge, mountain becomes valley, expands into exploration of urban transformations over the same period in the next project, subtitled Rocky Riverscape Become Flat, which examines the changes along the Han River in Seoul. Yes, it was a quite brutal process because all the rock become riverbanks for flood prevention, and this is what we call miracle of Han River. Located at where considered as one of the 8 great viewing points of the Western Han River in the past, Korea's first thermal power plant, the Dangil-ri power plant, was built in 1931. It expanded in the 1950s, Plant 2 and 3, again 1970s with Plant 4 and 5. In 2019, a new unique underground plant was constructed with a public park above, adjacent to the old plants. Our task was to preserve Plant 5 in its original form as industrial heritage, while Plant 4 underwent full-scale transformation into a space for performances and exhibitions next to Han River. We saw this task as potentially the last opportunity to create a significant public space with cultural ambition along the Han River. It is now trapped between high-speed road and high-rise apartment through the rapid flattening process. The site riverside ground surface barely exists, offering no river views despite of its proximity. So our main idea was to amplify the potential for the accessible collective space by proposing the Dangili Podium, a place that substitutes for the viewing points of a rocky, hilly pass along the Han River. We've connected and rebuilt the lightweight rooftops of 2 turbine halls, 18 meters above ground, as 130-meter-long elevated public space with escalators that offer direct access without the need to pass through building's interior. And on the ground level, the turbine hall 4 is converted into black box theater, and 5 is preserved. The 2 linear space can be connected by raising linear vertical lift doors, creating 130-meter-long space, which further expands into 120-meter-long linear outdoor space, public plaza with underground parking below, resulting in a combined 250-meter-long indoor-outdoor space, ideal for large events. So Plant 5 boiler is kept as industrial heritage, and while Plant 4 boiler is removed, creating 49-meter-tall void. The void is divided vertically in 3 parts: exhibition space at 10 meters below ground, and a large gathering lounge on the 2nd floor, both connected by ramps along the edges. Above the podium, the remaining 21-meter-tall top portion of the structure, once suspended the boiler, will be repurposed as a hyper-pavilion, with bleachers on the podium on a lightweight roof above. Original boiler maintenance catwalk remain as a viewing promenade that completely enveloped this 49-meter void in a spiraling sequence with the spectacular views of interior activities and the completely transformed Han River with artificial topography. Okay, here's another thing about the movie now. Chungmuro's transformation tells the story of Korean cinema itself. In the 50s, this district earned the nickname of Hollywood of Seoul, becoming the epicenter of Korea's film industry. Golden age arrived in the 60s when cinema was a dominant entertainment medium. Legendary theater was attracting people with marquees, and of course the TV challenged the dominance. And in the late 1990s, because Korea became a democratic with the freedom of expression, it nurtured a generation of filmmakers like Park Chan-wook or Bong Joon-ho. Later gained international acclaim. They came out during this as independent filmmakers. But then at the same time, it became a global industry. So although old theaters become multiplex, complexes become sort of pseudo-urban experience. What was used to be essentially very exciting urban experience. So our first architecture engagement was Chungmuro came in 2001. While practicing with James Slade in New York, we partnered with Kim Kwang-soo in Seoul to transform underused Chungmuro subway passage. Seoul's cultural department envisioned as a cinema gallery, essentially movie poster displays for 2002 World Cup tourists. However, our collaborator, the users, the Independent Filmmaker Association, had bigger dreams. This young, predominantly female collective demanded a genuine community hub for film activities. So we responded by designing a linear sequence within the 6-meter by 70-meter long passage, a flexible 50-seat theater, an experimental film archive, intimate viewing lounges, and it was revolutionary before YouTube existed, and then a cutting-edge digital production classroom. And this compressed timeline before the World Cup forced rapid, almost guerrilla-style implementation happened. A decade later, in 2011, the Korean cinema global success prompted famous director like Park and Pong to advocate for proper cinema tech. Despite Chungmuro's gentrification and soaring property values, Seoul committed to preserve to distinct cultural significance. Limited by budget but not imagination, the Seoul city acquired a small site suited for vertical development, a tower cinema. Our solution, Montage 425, 9 alternating volumes spanning 60 vertical meters, 5 enclosed boxes contain screening rooms, production facilities, and a rooftop cinema. 4 open intervals function as social connectors: cafe, lobby, library, gallery, auditorium, and offices. And each level creates its own atmosphere, like 4 stacked marquees, fostering different social aspects of film culture. From concept to completion took 7 years, and the opening arrived this November. This journey spans 23 years from 70-meter horizontal tunnel to a 60-meter vertical tower, Both subway passages and towers can feel like anonymous non-places, yet in each case we've crafted, I think, quite rich spatial montages that respond to urban constraints while nurturing Chungmuro's evolving creative community. The next one is only steps away from Seoul's historic center. It's about religion, 100 meters from Changgyeonggung Palace. Won Buddhism emerged in 1916 as Korea's modern spiritual movement, roughly about 700,000 followers in Korea. This Zen Buddhism sect centers on the one, meaning the circle, as both philosophical guide and cosmic symbol. I found it as an agnostic, it's quite interesting that modern ideas such as circularity or circular economy now resonate behind this religion that started more than 100 years ago. And here's our first encounter. The former temple had to be replaced due to aging. And we inherit a half-century this temple requiring complete reconstruction within this chaotic Seoul's collision, where centuries of architectural styles and scales and materials create a cacophonous symphony in a way. The challenge is 4 distinct buildings across 3 sites, each serving different congregational needs. And this main road is 14-story towers dominating, yet fragment of original hillside persists, connecting to traditional alleyways behind the modern wall of towers. First intervention transformed a former residence into our 3-story annex, housing meditation offices and flexible space as a sort of pop-up space. Right now is a children's bookstore. Climbing from the annex, visitors encounter the main temple complex. This religion emphasizing everyday religion, meaning that meditation integrated with the worldly engagement. We balance contradictory requirement, which is separation and connection, to support activities both in stillness and movement. Simultaneously, the large site accommodates the main temple and the donors' memorial as a traditional form of house, as also lined up as creating an axis. We call it a spine, and also domestic scale madang in between. And this is where we can kind of unify this complex while maintaining a dialogue with the surrounding at the same time. One survivor demanded preservation, a ginkgo tree standing since the temple's beginning. We maintain this witness as a temporal continuity, acknowledging non-human protagonists in this sacred space. This is a construction with the ginkgo tree standing alone, surrounded by this chaotic. And later I discovered this Guatemalan artist, Regina Jose Galindo's performance called Land, actually, and I was startled by visual parallels, despite her work addressing political violence decades ago. And you walk into a doorway, and there's a communal space, sort of like a foyer. And then you kind of walk into what we call one space. It's a 9-meter tall steel wall, just 18 millimeter thick, supporting a suspended circular opening. In stillness for meditation for Sunday's services, the sun movement created dynamic light patterns, a movement in stillness. And below the rear of the main sanctuary, the 14-meter high chamber enshrining clear glass tablets inscribed within the names of those who have departed. This is a Joseon Dynasty Seoul map and the acupuncture chart, and it's a striking resemblance, both depicting as a living organism with the network of flows and cyclical systems. 50 years ago, the temple was set on an apex of gentle hill, but now completely sort of disrupted conditions everywhere. There's no continuity, only one corner access. So it was almost our project become also secondary one, become a major one, which is kind of evolving into arterial surgery in a way, that unclogging the artery with the goal of no dead ends and no dead spaces in between the two buildings, these buildings. So this urban acupuncture transcended architectural intervention, becoming a social process. This congregation negotiated patiently with the neighbors to establish continuous circular movement all around the temple, which called 7 octopus legs, so that with the connecting with the diverse neighborhood life. And the most dramatic change occurred when the western plot shifted from a parking lot to a children's cancer care center, requiring connection to the northern medical campus. So we had to change, although our construction began 1 year later, all voluntarily, and the timing was actually quite perfect. Anyway, this circulation kind of become a three-dimensional promenade, become what they call paths of enlightenment, punctuated by moments of stillness in movement, such as prayer room at the top of Dharma building, which finally sort of revealed the genius loci, what happened, why it was placed there 70 years ago with the palace view. And the top view here is the monastery rooftop, which almost culminates like a panoramic view of like an end credit of a movie where all the protagonists of this urban element from the very beginning to 21st century revealed itself. Lastly, I'm going to talk about seventh challenge. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the Serpentine Pavilion program, and I was honored to design this last year pavilion, which felt like a great riddle and quite an unexpected opportunity. Okay, I have to, sorry. When the program started in 2001 with such optimism about the new millennium, Google has just started. We thought we'll all become connected and very happy celebrating diversity. And the smartphone appeared a few years later, 2007 and so on. Then quarter of century and 2 dozens of Serpentine pavilions later, we are somewhere in a quite different place. We are looking at the platforms of the previous pavilions. 8 were circular, round, 6 rectangular, so 2/3 were complete geometry, and the rest is free form. Look at our own pavilions that we did. Mass Studies started in 2003. Almost during the same time period, we also proposed many circular plan structures for some reason, almost about 2/3. In fact, we can trace this tendency toward utopian completeness through the entire 20th century, from Bruno Taut, Buckminster Fuller, hippie era drop city, and so on. So first, we decided to give a most overused central territory of the Serpentine lawn a rest by creating a void and begin to look at what can happen at the periphery. Each structure, or what we call an island, are simple. Each outer tip of the island is unique in shape, form, and scale, wide to narrow, high to low, small to large. However, toward the center, all 5 islands have the same end condition, the same arc length at the same height, coming together to form an 8-meter diameter circular void. Each island was given a specific program, distinct function, yet remained flexible. The gallery's welcoming main entry with a sound installation with close friend, Korean composer Jang Young-gyu. Auditorium is the largest room, serving as a general scattering area and performance venue. Again, my good friend Eun-mi-yeon brought a 10% troupe to perform a piece called North Korean Dance. The library we tried to make a Korean literary tradition of this genre of architecture, and then we teamed up with the Singaporean artist Hee Man-chong's conceptual serial work titled Library of Unread Books. And also digging the history of the Serpentine South Gallery, we learned that the original building, which is the Serpentine South Gallery, was built as a tea house in 1934. So we thought we'll give this as a form-specific architecture, embracing necessary small commercial activity for park users. Lastly, the play tower, a narrow 7-meter tall structure, which was quite popular with children and students. These five covered spaces alternate with 5 open spaces in between them, with the madang, central void, at the center. At the end, all 11 spaces maintain distinct characters, yet stay very connected. The pavilion created an appropriately scaled space with balance of openness and enclosure, distance and intimacy, allowing occupants to be apart or to be together. The central void is this Korean madang, which is a Korean house that kind of supports the everyday to some big collective rituals. And there are many things happen, many unexpected events happen. And together with the sound, taste, and scent, tactile experience was also generated by soft pine wood structure that function also as benches and counters. Natural timber was used on this lawn for the first time, sourced from Surrey, just 30 kilometers away. We exposed also modern joinery techniques and also traditional joinery, dialogue between vernacular and contemporary. And also we use a natural stone paving, lightly fixed for reuse, low carbon, reusable precast concrete and foundation, and for plinth. So it's all reusable. The plinths utilize topographic changes installed at the same height, while the entire site slopes about 70 centimeters. So at the highest level, they're used as benches at the auditorium, starting at 30 centimeter height, then gradually become 1 meter tall on the other end to use as a counter surface for the tea house. The pavilion is contextual, abstract, site-specific, and siteless at the same time. The pavilion will travel to unknown future locations, and instead of being a giant sculpture using surroundings only as a backdrop, we wanted to welcome and anticipate complex conditions and obstacles to generate new dialogue. These 5 islands can be reassembled into 5 factorial, 120 constellations to adopt. In fact, there will be a yet announced a second landing with a new constellation in the spring of 2026, and I think there will be another one follow at least a year later. Poet Kim Hae-sun wrote a beautiful poem for the catalog. She ends the poem with the verse, "The fist that unfolds on its own," resonating with our idea of incompleteness. I think this was our 7th ground challenge. I have presented several ground challenges that we have confronted and found worthy of undertaking. They arise from sometimes geopolitical dynamism, whether it's the Giardini of Venice or DMZ, a 4-kilometer wide border between North and South Korea, or from the explosive capitalist urban development and sudden inertia and its aftermath, or simply from particular cultural conditions with their own unique history that requires collective nurturing, maybe, with their own histories within our radically changing time. This engagement has been quite meaningful for us, maybe because they're not so easy and simple. Anyway, muchas gracias for your attention. Thank you.
Desde Londres nos acompaña Alison Brooks, fundadora de Alison Brooks Architects. Es una de las arquitectas más premiadas del Reino Unido, reconocida por la fuerza conceptual y poética de sus proyectos de vivienda, cultura y espacio público. Demos la bienvenida a Alison Brooks en alianza con el British Council.
Yeah. Where's the screen? Where's my screen? Hi, everyone. Thank you to Mextrópoli for inviting me to speak. It's amazing being here in Mexico City. So I want not only to thank Mextrópoli, but also all of you who are working in housing. I'm going to talk about housing. I think you all know it's a really tough gig working in housing. It's probably the most difficult sector or subject matter to work in to achieve your ideals and to achieve the quality that we all desire, both for quality of life, but also for the quality of our cities. So, yeah, I think we suffer quite a bit, I think, in our chosen role. And it's funny because about 10 years ago, I was talking to one of my sons about my projects and how hard it was and how we were going to sort of power through in spite of everything to achieve the work that we aimed for. And he said, you know, I think you're like a knight of faith. He was reading Kierkegaard, and the Kierkegaard's knight of faith is basically someone who just believes in the impossible and believes they'll be able to achieve it and carries on in spite of that. So maybe I'm a knightess of faith. And I also want to say, I think we're all aware of the housing crises that persist not only in Europe, in the UK, in Canada, and America, everywhere. And so this condition of a housing crisis it's not changed. It's been with us for 25 years. And I think we know that market forces are not going to, or the market is not going to solve the problems of housing. There needs to be a massive shift in the way we fund and organize and structure the delivery of housing. And I think this is the title of my talk, Housing is Civic Building, because this is my ambition to change the way we as a society think about housing, the way architects think about housing, our clients. It's a civic building we're creating. So, if I can change. So, just to give you a quick overview of the practice, here is a kind of overall collection of work that I've done in the past nearly 30 years. 29 years, and you can see it's kind of a compilation not only of housing, but of work in the arts, the Smile Pavilion, 2017, Folkestone Performing Arts Center, private houses, residential and education buildings, the Cohen Quad in Oxford, this bottom image, which is education building with living space, which is a kind of ideal format, ideal client in a way. And at the moment, our work is spread around the world. If it was a map, a world map with competitions, I think all of the UK would be solid black. And a lot of Europe. Most of my work I win through competitive, competitions, design competitions. So I was very jealous listening to Stephen Hall saying, I was offered to do this building and I was offered to do that building. I think that's only ever happened to me twice. So yeah, we're working in Taiwan, in the Middle East, UK, Europe, Canada, Toronto, and some of the projects on the drawing board. Sorry, there's something a bit funny with the slides. They're all blurry. Maybe it's not the, I don't know what happened here. Sorry about that. But here's a selection of projects on the drawing board right now. So I'm doing a Faculty of Information, the top left, up in at the University of Toronto, towers in the Olympic Park, co-housing projects in London, and a science pavilion hub in Cambridge, and towers in Taiwan. So a pretty diverse array of projects. And probably the biggest one is Toronto Quayside. It was a master plan, collaborative master plan I won 2021. And working with Henning Larsen and SLA. And the building on the sort of far left of that blue outline is my project, phase 1A, which is now going to be phase 2. And this is another highly idealistic project to transform a kind of super tall tower, 70 stories, into a kind of host for nature. And the kind of core of the master plan was the idea of the community forest. I'm not sure if there's a pointer here. Maybe not, but you can see the kind of traditional format in North America is the tower podium model on the left, and then the idea of merging the tower with a podium to create a kind of embrace of this landscape, a community forest, and then the tower becomes this encrusted with balconies and shading devices and trellises to kind of restore the stopping point for birds and insects and pollinators, the kind of waterfront ecology, and to reimagine towers as these places of sort of nature-friendly life. But I'm going to step back from the practice portfolio now and just talk about housing. I'm going to talk about 4 projects, but I'm going to start with this quote from Alberto Perez Gomez, and this is a very fortunate coincidence. I didn't know he was from Mexico until, I don't know, like yesterday. But as you know, he's a historian, architectural historian and theorist. I listened to his lectures when I was studying architecture, and I think this is from one of his essays where he talks about gravity. And gravity is the most immediate manifestation of Eros, the love of Mother Earth. And then he goes on to talk about the wall and the wall's capacity to reveal this gift of love to us. Nature's space of desire, our being with limits, experiencing life in the space of desire, always reaching and yet falling short. We find a sense of direction. The wall naturally connects earth and heaven beyond all theological dogmatism. And I just think this is a really interesting, interesting way of thinking about housing, because housing is a lot about the wall. It's about that boundary between the realm of the private world and the public world. And the way we treat that wall as housing architects is hugely important, because for me, that's also the public realm. The public realm is not just horizontal, it's also vertical. It's the form and language of our cities, and primarily housing. So I use this as a kind of pretext for the project I taught this year with ETSAM in Madrid. Every year I teach a housing master's, and this is this year's class. If there's anybody in the room from the MCH masters, hello, and you were amazing. Many students from this side of the Atlantic, and we worked on a site in La Latina in Madrid. And here you can see, you can maybe see the kind of empty site in the middle of the model there, and there's like 4 different variations of a housing project as a kind of an infill on the site of a former, the fort, the Wall of Madrid, and all of these projects explore the nature of the wall and how we might inhabit it, and as a means of kind of communion and dialogue with the street, and as a way of embracing nature. So I have a large portfolio of housing. A lot of it is working with geometry to kind of alleviate density. I've also exhibited twice at the Venice Biennale, both within a theme of housing. So in 2018, the Grafton Architects curated Venice Biennale with the theme of free space. And this installation explored the kind of 4 key elements or ideas in housing So these four totems each have an identity. The arch is expressing or offering the experience of threshold. Another totem is inhabited roofs. Another one is the idea of passage and journey. And the one on the right is inhabited boundaries. And all of them played with optical illusion and kind of experiencing phenomenologically the qualities of space that you can achieve in housing. And then in 2021, this was my installation in Hashim Sarki's Biennale, How Do We Live Together? And here, this installation called Home Ground was a kind of table with a sort of Campo Marzio of many of my housing projects. And I separated the upper stories, the kind of private realm of those buildings from the ground, to illustrate and kind of celebrate the way housing projects work as spaces of community, of gathering, of social exchange, obviously commercial opportunities as well. But really, it's about how we kind of underestimate the contribution that housing projects make to quality of life in terms of the street, in terms of neighborhood and opportunities for kind of fruitful social gathering. So this was the kind of compilation of the projects, and the interiors were all modeled, the furniture was all modeled, and this is the Cohen Quad, which is both a teaching building but also residential up close. So now I'm going to talk about projects. And the first theme I'm going to speak about is this idea of street architecture. And I don't know if you've heard of this terminology before, but street architecture is what developers and surveyors and the general populace who was building 19th century Britain, and in particular 19th century London, called architecture, the architecture of housing. It was called street architecture because there was a kind of common understanding that if you built, there were no regulations, there were no planning guidelines back then, you would respect generally the building line, the eaves line, the massing, and the kind of block dimensions of your neighbors. And as you all know, London is famous for its beautiful streets, its terraced housing, Georgian terraced housing, Victorian mansion blocks on the right, and the kind of reciprocal relationship between these housing typologies and public space or green space. And this is Bedford Square, famously contained within a block of Georgian terraced houses, and this was a way of attracting value and investment in sort of 18th century Britain, but it's also a kind of civic gesture. And so this kind of integral relationship between housing and urban design is expressed really clearly in London and in many European cities. And so really the first opportunity I had to push this idea of street architecture was with Ely Court, and this figure ground plan, you can kind of see the outline of a triangular boundary around what was a really dangerous estate, sort of housing project from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s that the London Borough of Brent decided to regenerate in the early 2000s and commissioned a site-wide master plan, 25-year master plan with about 30 sites around that entire district. And you can see the difference in the figure ground plan between the fabric of sort of 19th century Kilburn and the South Kilburn estate, which was a really dangerous place to live. And so this project was a competition staged by the borough, the municipality, a really quick competition. And you can see outlined, it's just a kind of piece of semi-occupied land with 2 buildings with 8 maisonettes oriented diagonally to the street. So, and then this familiar slab blocks from the 60s kind of forming a backdrop. And basically it was a sort of backwater. You wouldn't go into this site unless you had to, a condition of many housing projects from the post-war era. And these 2 photographs of the street tell the story really clearly. You have the kind of historic 19th century semi-detached villas on the left, most of which were torn down in the 50s, and on the right, the housing project, which was really a failed estate and really suffering from isolation, gangs, drugs, knives, you name it, even despite the lush greenery. So this project was an opportunity to reimagine this site as offering a kind of street architecture, and you can see with these 3 diagrams on the top left, the principle of restoring a positive relationship to the streets with a terrace, breaking that terrace to include an existing green space in front of one of the towers, and then introducing a new mews and a continuous street and flow through the site. And then in the bottom, you can see 3 different types of terrace, a mansion block terrace, townhouses, and then a little flat-iron building. And these 3 building types each respond to its locality in a specific way. And the colored diagram, you can see the kind of mix of typologies, lots of front doors, lots of entrances. So the blue diagram on the left are the 2-story maisonettes on the ground floor to bring lots of front doors and active frontages to the street, and then multiple cores leading up to apartments above. And this is 40% social housing, this scheme, which is mandatory in Britain. Any development, any scheme with housing, especially in London, has to be minimum 40% social housing, but it has to be invisible and embedded in the scheme. So this image shows how the scheme kind of disappears into the fabric and the scale and the character of the neighborhood, which I consider a success, because I think in many of these, the projects, the social housing projects, the stigma of living in a social housing project is because they are turned away from the street and the neighborhood. And so this building is very much about presenting a kind of social gesture to the street. So the 2-story high porticos, that's a 2-story maisonette. It's like a veranda, a front door with a little front garden, and then communal entrances. You can see in the middle, double height entrances with lift core leading up to the apartments above. And so this is, and then this kind of very familiar layering that you have in London of a small front garden, a veranda, and inset balconies that become outdoor rooms. And this building actually really did transform the relationship of the people who live in the neighborhood to the wider neighborhood. Everybody uses those verandas and porticos. And really the only things I was working with here was the proportions of the windows, a really good material, a really good brick, and then the porticos. So it's working with really limited means to achieve a kind of significant transformation in terms of neighborhood and sort of safety and the idea of a friendly street. So we subsequently won 2 other competitions in South Kilburn, and I'm just going to mention this one, Unity Place, which is circled up there. All of these competitions also were generally collaborations with different architects. But the rest of the estate, there were about 7 blocks with this exact format of tower, of slab block, with a a bunch of pavilions on a parking podium with a kind of moat around the project, and basically a no-go zone. You just take your life in your hands going anywhere into this podium. And so really this project was about restoring the urban design, like the great 19th century urban design that we all know and love and hardly anybody ever speaks about. The idea of urban tableaus and axis, restoring a street which is on axis to a beautiful neo-Gothic church, the 1970s podium tower, utopia in the center, and then on the right our proposal in collaboration with Field and Clyde Bradley architects, where they took the southern part of the site, we took the northern part, and there's a community play space in the center. And so this project was kind of densifying the mansion block model, so it's 6 stories high. It's working really hard to provide the density of the kind of competition brief. And this was an opportunity to be kind of more playful and animated with the balconies, and to create a really big contrast between the kind of street, language of the street, and the internal courtyards, which are, and you can see here, this is the private communal garden for the 3 buildings that form its kind of edge. And on the right, the communal, the kind of neighborhood play space that really invites the wider neighborhood, the kids from local schools to sort of be in this place that was once a really scary podium project. So it's about kind of restoring those urban relationships, but also offering really great flats, really good quality of life. All of the housing I do is French doors. I don't do any other kind of window, and recessed balconies. So this is a social housing apartment on the top floor of one of my mansion blocks, and you can see just the kind of amazing types of space that you can achieve just working within a kind of simple form and typology. My mantra is that I only design housing where I would be happy to live. So, I'd be really happy to live up there someday. So my next proposition is that housing is workplace. And this is another kind of legacy of the old zoning ideas that, there's housing and there's office and there's, business districts and there's cultural space and community space, but actually housing does everything, and it really does workplace. We all work from home, whether we like it or not, and whether it's institutionalized or not. So this project, which is called Rubicon, is in Northwest Cambridge, so it's part of the urban extension that's been promoted by the University of Cambridge to provide affordable key worker housing to the university staff, but also a mix of private sale that sort of cross-subsidizes that. And so this long plot that's sort of on the edge of the master plan overlooking a wetland was a site that I competed for and won, I think in 2018, something like that. And so you can see the kind of unusual condition of this project it's on the edge of a master plan, so a kind of reasonably dense master plan with an edge fronting this landscape. And so I needed to figure out a way of kind of addressing that edge without sort of bleeding down into a suburban low scale or creating a wall. And so this kind of Z-shaped plan is a product of a very thin site and then a courtyard building at the end that sort of optimizes the site width at that part. And it was an opportunity to kind of reintroduce the idea of the mill building. Traditionally, the first, industrial revolution buildings were actually big mills in the countryside. And so this idea of bringing a kind of robust form to a semi-rural edge, bringing cycling into the home in a really easy way, and then the idea of threshold and kind of echoing the Cambridge University court. So these ideas were informing the strategy, and here you can see the result. It's also a strategy for density. So those Z-shape plans allowed us to get an entire extra building onto the plot and increase the unit count by 30 units, I think, because this was a developer-architect competition. And the courtyard building on the end is, again, it's kind of echoing the Cambridge court, and 40% of this strip is also social. It's subsidized university worker housing. So here you can see how those Z-shaped plans allowed a kind of city-facing courtyard and a rural-facing courtyard, and creates a kind of meander between them. And here you can see the streetscape that resulted from that. So it's a kind of slightly porous streetscape, and the idea of a roofline, a sort of meandering or undulating roofline that echoes, again, the warehouse, but also a kind of the landscape of Cambridge itself, sort of breaking the rule of the straight parapet, the threshold condition, the courtyards, which are used by residents, and the co-working spaces that you can see on the left. And we worked so basically residents meet each other in the co-working foyer. I always put co-working spaces in the lobbies. There's no point in a lobby unless it's usable. So these are the kind of courtyards and homes that we've managed to bring in a relatively urban way to a quite rural setting, a kind of urban edge setting. Okay, I'm going to have to speed up. So the next idea or theme I want to talk about is this idea of welcoming gravity. And this is in relation to a project that's now called Cadence in King's Cross. And this is it's one of the final pieces of the King's Cross master plan. So you can see on the left the overall master plan, which is an incredibly successful new place in London, and maybe Bjarke is going to talk about the Google headquarters that he's designed there. But it's a collection of really good buildings with a really good client who is the King's Cross Partnership. And you can see St. Pancras Station and King's Cross Station sort of anchoring the master plan. And I wanted to also highlight this sort of framework which the developers arrived at with the London Borough of Camden when they managed to get the master plan through after, I think it took 10 years, but the 10 principles have really underpinned everything that's happened across the master plan and sort of delivered on quality. And this is the kind of place it's created, so amazing urban squares, sort of axes to historic landmarks, preservation of historic fabric, and integration with the new. And here is the north part of the master plan with Granary Square, its famous amphitheater, the canals, and on the right, this kind of empty site, this potent empty site at the top of the park. So when I was invited to do this competition, after about 10 years of pursuing King's Cross Partnership to try and get invited onto a competition, I just immediately thought that this is an opportunity to sort of draw this spirit of this railway infrastructure, this kind of exuberant 19th century language and identity to the top part of the master plan. I think I was also thinking about maybe Place des Vosges. Place des Vosges is kind of behind all of my housing projects as well. Maybe the Forum of Trajan, the red brick is so memorable in terms of color and texture. And so these diagrams show the sort of the master plan parameters on the left. So there was a very strict envelope, 15 stories, with the Thameslink train tunnels running under the left part of the site, and a series of kind of carving out that mass to achieve kind of ideal residential depths for the blocks, and then kind of manipulating the height to get light into the courtyard. And so it became a sort of courtyard tower hybrid. And this here are the kind of iterations during the competition process. It could have been a podium tower, it could have been many things, but this idea of bringing a sort of exuberant language of arches, really channeling George Gilbert Scott. I think he's got 40 different arch types in St. Pancras Station in St. Pancras Hotel. So these are kind of trying to find ways of reinterpreting the arch in a contemporary way. And this became an idea of an arched base and arches appearing throughout the scheme, but Bezier arches. So here's the plan, and there's a reflecting pool in the middle and a cloister. So I've kind of brought some of the influences from working in Oxford, travels in Italy, and then on the right you can see the mix, that everything in blue is market sale, and then green is affordable pocket living with retail on the ground floor. So here is our competition render. So this idea of a threshold building that changes in form and kind of articulation as you move around it. Commercial, social, and retail spaces around the perimeter with a reflecting pool. Here it is in our recasting model for the Venice Biennale, and just a quick journey through. So the arrival moments, a sort of colonnaded entrance foyer, playing a trick with mirrors, and then these are renders of the reflecting pool, and then the sort of really fantastic quality of living space with high ceilings and amazing views. We did the full construction documents. We scripted every brick in the building and designed it to be fully prefabricated. So every piece of the building is 85% prefabricated. Here's the ground floor setting out of some of the arches, panelized facade. So it's brick on precast. So here are the panels being made in the factory in Sheffield. So bricks laid face down on formwork, and then concrete poured on top, and the panels tilted up and pointed in the yard. So the quality control is amazing. The site is super clean because there isn't a kind of materials compound to deal with. So the frame went up and the facade at the same time. So really quick, practically zero waste as far as construction sites go, and the final scheme. And here are, again, a sort of journey around the building, the approach from the south. There is an idea of the picturesque here. I think most architects don't talk about the picturesque. They call it the Instagram moment, but I think that's just a contemporary way of saying a picturesque composition. And here, just some details, the way we dealt with the panels, the corners, with elements of precast, the colonnaded reflecting pool, the reception area, and here's the reflecting pool looking into the community space, the staircase to the cycle store, and then some of the units have these fantastic arched windows. So this project is about great places to live, but also about making a great neighborhood and framing a civic space, giving back. So housing is civic building because of all these things, from pattern language to workplace to urban design to wall of love. But most important, it's about creating a home for everyone. So thank you very much, and don't forget to buy the book. Thank you.
En la 12ª edición de Mextrópoli 2025 nos acompaña Bjarke Ingels, fundador de BIG, Bjarke Ingels Group. Es uno de los arquitectos más influyentes de su generación, reconocido por integrar sostenibilidad, tecnología y visión futurista en sus proyectos. Su obra abarca desde viviendas sociales hasta megaproyectos urbanos e infraestructurales en todo el mundo. Demos la bienvenida a Bjarke Ingels en alianza con la Embajada de Dinamarca y Península.
Buenas noches. Muy contento de estar aquí. And I have to say, I'm impressed with the commitment that everybody is spending their Friday night listening to architecture talks. Maybe first I wanted to show you where we work in Copenhagen. We built our headquarters next to the container port of Copenhagen. And it's sort of where the city ends. So the asphalt stops, and we created a park around our building. The building is really designed like a very industrial building that's sort of supposed to be in the port. The park is essentially imagining, like, you know, in France during the student riots in 1968, they said "Sous le palier la plage," underneath the pavement, the beach. So you actually have sand that comes out when you remove the asphalt. And even though the building is raw, it is welcoming. Actually, every time where it lands on the ground, it's a bench. So around the building, you're sort of invited to lean and sit on the building. We came from a factory, a Carlsberg factory, where we were all on one level. So I was afraid, it's a 7-story building. I was afraid that we were going to be segregated between the different floors. So we designed the building so that every floor is connected to the outside. Of course, the ground is the park, but then the higher floors are connected to a terrace, and that terrace is connected to the floor above and the floor below. So it's almost like a Soho fire scare. That means that you can actually, on any level, you can walk out and then you can go home. Inside, every floor is maximum half of the floor area, so you always have an opening so you can see your colleagues on the level above or the level below. You have these enormous framed views of the port. The floor height is 4 meters, and a 4-meter concrete wall can easily span 20 meters. So essentially, the walls become like beams. So you end up with these kind of a window that only has water and one that has windmills. Because of the long spans, the longest span is like 50 meters or 45 meters, we had to place a column. And we tried to avoid it for a long time, but there was a lot of money in putting that column. So in the end, we thought, like, actually stone is 5 times stronger than cement. So between each beam, we just inserted a Norwegian or Swedish granite, and then as the loads get lighter, they become marbles up through the building. You have like, there's no paint in the building. Every material is what it is because it does what it does. So the concrete on the floor, the concrete facade, the steel stairs, steel guardrails, the stone column. And essentially, it's almost like this kind of Hogwarts space with the stairs connecting between the different levels. The stone is just sourced straight from the quarry. And all the sort of support functions, normally in an office building, you have a core in the middle. So even if you have the whole floor, you have to search for your colleagues around the core. In this case, it's entirely open, but all the support functions are actually located in this wooden wall to the north. So the workshop, the meeting rooms, the toilets, the technical spaces, the kitchen is all inside this northern wall. It's also all the functions that require mechanical ventilation. So they have the minimum amount of solar exposure. So the building is actually naturally ventilated, except for the north wall. And finally, sort of on the top floor, I was planning to move in to make it my own penthouse. But then my girlfriend thought it was a stupid idea to live on top of the office. So sadly, it's now the office's penthouse. You actually step up, so there's a bookshelf, and you step up on the terrace, but we didn't have enough depth for the trees. So we created this kind of archipelago, like a Scandinavian version of a Japanese garden. And then we negotiated with the forester that he cut the tree on the diagonal, so that you have this kind of organic, sort of almost coastline of the garden. So, and finally, like, because the building is surrounded by salt water on all sides, on the outside, we were thinking about maybe doing a timber building, but timber wouldn't survive the salt water. And on the inside, we couldn't have the 7 floors open to each other if it was wood. And by Danish fire code, you can only have 25% wood surface, and that's actually the north wall. So we already had maxed out on the wood. So we made it out of concrete, and it's a special kind of concrete where a third of the cement has been replaced with clay. So it actually lowers the carbon footprint with 30%, but it also makes the concrete look slightly warmer, almost like more beige or brown. I actually live on the other side of the port. This is my house. It's a piece of decommissioned infrastructure, an old Norwegian car ferry that I have renovated to turn it into the home of my family. So this is below deck. It's a perfect room for children because you can climb on the walls, literally. And it's located so that I see the sun setting over the King's Palace, and then I see the sun rising over Copenhagen, this man-made mountain that we have created. So when I wake up, I feel like an important guy in Copenhagen. The building is the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. It's so clean that the steam coming out of the chimney is cleaner than the air of Copenhagen. So we could turn the facade into the tallest man-made climbing wall in the world. You have to be a pretty skilled climber and fearless. So if you are not fearless, you can take the elevator inside and admire all the technology that scrubs and filters particles from the air and CO2. And you can make it to the roof that is like a man-made mountain where you are free to hike and picnic and downhill ski. Denmark notoriously never wins anything in the Winter Olympics. We got nothing in Sochi, we got nothing in Beijing. I hope we're going to change that now that the Copenhageners can actually practice at home. This sort of basic idea, you can actually see my houseboat over in the corner. this idea, we've called it hedonistic sustainability. The idea that a clean power plant is not only better for the environment, it's also more enjoyable for the people that live around it and in the city. It's an idea we discovered with our first project 25 years ago, the Copenhagen Harbor Bath, that essentially extends the life of the city into the water around it. We did the harbor bath in Aarhus also. And essentially when we opened the harbor bath and we sort of saw the Copenhageners jumping into the port instead of driving their car for hours to get to the beaches, we thought that this is a bigger idea. That the clean port is not only nice for the fish, it's also amazing for the citizens that live around it. That the sustainable city is actually more enjoyable, more desirable than the unsustainable city. And that kind of idea of hedonistic sustainability we've been pursuing it ever since. Another aspect, since this conference is about living, I will show a few living spaces. Because you can say in many ways, being an architect is also trying to sort of create something extraordinary out of the ordinary, to organize the ordinary aspects of everyday life using normal building materials and put them together in a way so they create something that is more than the sum of the parts. And just a few examples, some of our first projects was the VM and houses on the mountain in Copenhagen. VM houses, we took apartments, we took like the balconies are 5 meters long, so instead of having an expensive cantilever, they're hanging in a tension rod, and they create this kind of vertical community that when you moved, I lived there for a year myself, when you moved out on your balcony, you would get to know everybody in the kind of vertical dimension. Inside, they were like these three-dimensional puzzles of double height and triple height units interlocking. Next to it, we designed the mountain, which is a parking structure. So a man-made mountain of cars. A single funicular elevator gives access to the homes above. And essentially, upstairs, it's like every apartment is a penthouse. Or it's like having a house with a garden in the middle of the city. Not so far from there, for the same client, we created the infinity loop that combines shops and offices, townhouses and apartments in such a way that you can actually walk and bicycle all the way to the roof and down again. You can see like the children living there can actually like walk out and just like run down the sort of three-dimensional street and play with their friends. So you have almost like this kind of small-scale community in the middle of a city block. These two girls live on the 7th and the 9th floor, but they can just walk out and go down and knock on the door. We've created affordable housing where we worked with prefabricated modularity. So you can see the modules are stacked in such a way that every second room is the in-between space. You can sort of see that you have two modules and then you have the in-between. You have 2.5 meter ceilings in the bedrooms, and then you have 3.5 meter ceilings in the kitchen and living spaces because of the way that they're stacked. The guardrail is a construction site fence. It's the cheapest way to make a guardrail, and it's quite elegant. And inside, it has a kind of raw finish, and you have these little level changes that actually makes the homes quite interesting. So somehow, the logic of how it's built ended up, the modularity almost created freedom and generosity. You have an almost 100-year wait list to get into these apartments. And this idea of the modular almost as a form of freedom, we created this courtyard in Sweden where the modularity dissolves the building block, and you end up with this kind of course, it ensures privacy, it eliminates thermal exposure and glare, and it produces this variety of homes with beautiful roof gardens. And the courtyard is this kind of classic Scandinavian typology. When I moved to New York in 2010, we brought the courtyard with us, creating the Skyscraper that somehow combines the communal space of the European courtyard with the verticality and density of an American skyscraper. So creating a kind of oasis in the middle of Manhattan, where you don't hear the noise of the highway, and transforming the kind of boxy silhouette of a Manhattan tower into this striking form. In Amsterdam, in the port of Amsterdam, we created a 10-story city block that basically opens to the Eich, the port of Amsterdam, so you can sail or paddleboard into the courtyard that becomes like a marina where the local kids go swimming. So almost like inviting the port all the way into the heart of the block. It's maritime grade aluminum, so it continues down into the port. It's heated and cooled with thermal piles that go into the port. And it has a solar farm on the roof, and then additional solar as part of the marina to offset the energy consumption. So like these ideas, turning the ordinary into the extraordinary, and this idea of hedonistic sustainability, you can almost call the overall mindset of how we try to work utopian pragmatism. The idea that utopia is a place so perfect that it can only exist in fiction. And pragmatism is the idea of dealing with the world as it actually is. So it seems like an oxymoron. It seems like a contradiction in terms. But every time you are invited as an architect to create a space or a place, you have an opportunity to solve all the practicalities of this particular project in such a way that it becomes like a small fragment of how you wish the world was. A few examples. This is Vestra. It's the most environmentally friendly factory in the world. It's located in the Norwegian forest. It's made from locally sourced timber. It has it's heated and cooled with geothermal. It's powered by local hydroelectricity. We negotiated with the fire department that we only had to cut down 5 meters of trees so that you can drive a fire truck around the factory. So that means that the factory workers are working in the middle of a forest. It's made with timber, which means that the columns, the beams, the slabs are actually already beautiful. You don't have to clad them or paint them. They come like this straight out of the mass timber factory. It's a factory where they make wooden furniture and paint. There's a courtyard in the middle for the administration. The roof is actually accessible to the public, so you can actually walk up and down the roof. The roof is covered with locally sourced turf and photovoltaics. We took the turf from where the building is. We even moved different elements from the forest so that the amount of habitat is the same after the factory was built as it was before. But you don't have to make an entire factory to make a statement about how you wish the world was. This is our smallest project. It's a one-room hotel on the Arctic Circle in Sweden. And it's a treehouse. We worked with a local ornithologist who gave us the names of the 28 birds and 2 bats that nest in the area. And he also gave us an important information. He says that birds don't drop where they nest. So everybody always asks, aren't the windows going to be covered with bird shit? But actually birds, they fly away, and then they do their business, and then they fly back to where they live. So you wake up in the morning to the tweeting of birds, and you shower next to a squirrel. And you're literally immersed in nature. You're surrounded by nature, around you, underneath you, and above you. And this very simple idea, it's a $300,000 project. It generated 1 billion impressions the first month when we opened it. So this idea that you can actually make a very strong statement, in this case about like immersion and respect for nature, with a tiny little one-room hotel. But at the different end of the scale, we're actually working on Zurich's new airport, which will be the largest timber building on Earth, significantly lowering the carbon footprint. It's made from locally sourced timber. When we did the competition, it was a 2-year-long competition. In the beginning, the timber was a risk, but then the collapse of the global supply chain, we did it during COVID, suddenly meant that importing steel became very expensive. And then Putin invaded Ukraine, so then energy prices went up, so steel and concrete got very expensive. And all our timber is from Switzerland. None of the timber comes further away than 2 hours. So suddenly it almost became the safest choice. It's like walking through a kind of space frame of timber girders, but essentially the floor, the beams, the slabs, it's not a finish. It's really the material that the building is made of. The only concrete are the foundations and then the control tower that pulls up the skylight. And you know, as architects, we're always quite nervous when we announce a project. What evil nickname is the building gonna get? And this one was called the Cafetera, which is kind of an Italian design classic. And it's covered in photovoltaics, powering 2/3 of the airport. This is we've done a series of buildings for Google. Alison mentioned Google in London. These are some of the first buildings in San Francisco Bay. And they're on the bay, and we created this nice park with Olin around it. But when you look closer, you can see that these water elements are actually cascading root zone gardens, because all the rainwater that drops on the building is harvested. Then all of the black and gray wastewater is then filtered and cleaned in the landscape. So the landscape you walk around in is not only beautiful to look at, it's also high performing, and it actually sends the water clean into the bay. The roofs are covered in what the Googlers call dragon scales, photovoltaic tiles, so that every photon that hits the building is either turned into energy or it's let in through these clear story smiles. The kind of catenary shape of the grid shell, the catenary curve is the materially most efficient way to make a long span. So you can see that the roof is incredibly thin because it's like gently sagging as it crosses between the columns. And underneath, you have this kind of mass timber deck of almost like a marketplace for collaboration and innovation. Gradient canopy is where the Googlers are doing their AI now. But essentially, sort of all examples of this idea of a future that is not only better for the environment, but also maybe more fun to work in and more beautiful to live in. Well, lastly, we just broke ground in Sevilla on one of the hottest days, 46 degrees in June. And Sevilla is one of the hottest cities in Europe, for the Joint Research Center for the European Commission. The building is half the European Commission and half a public space. And we created this kind of stepped solar dome of photovoltaic roofs that shade a plaza. It's almost like this modern interpretation of Islamic architecture with the slender columns. It's a naturally ventilated, naturally shaded plaza, which means that we could make the facade very transparent because you're already shaded when you're standing on the plaza. So the Sevillanos can actually sort of see what the commissioners are doing inside. And of course, you have like nice shaded spaces for the people working there. And it actually produces twice as much power as the building consumes. So the grid goes back into the power goes back into the grid, so it's part of supplying energy to the city. And in 18 years, it will have produced so much energy that it will fully have offset all of the carbon invested in building the building. And after 18 years, it becomes a carbon negative building. I had the honor to, a few years ago, to go and present this project and some other ideas at the Vatican, at the Vatican Academy of Art and Sciences. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU, also came and met with the Pope. And if you ever have to visit the new Pope and you wonder what to give him, he already has a framed photo of one of our projects. So I'm not a Catholic, but if I was, I think this could be my ticket to... So maybe a last little category of projects, and then I'm going to end with a project that has occupied me a lot the last 2 years. Buildings can often also be shaped by their surroundings. Like in this case, this is a museum in Norway in a sculpture park with a river. And the museum is designed like a bridge that takes you from one side of the river to the other. You have a vertical space and a horizontal space overlooking the water. In the middle, they turn 90 degrees. It looks like a sculptural form, but when you look closer, you can see that it's actually made out of standard extruded aluminum profiles on the outside. And on the inside, it's made out of standard timber 2x4s. So even though you see curves and warped surfaces, every element is completely ordinary. So you can really say, again, it's almost like creating something extraordinary out of something ordinary. And all of the ventilation, mechanical, air control, lighting is integrated into this very standardized tectonic. And you can almost say that the building is a museum, but it is also a bridge, and it is also a sculpture in a sculpture park. This is the Danish pavilion in Shanghai in 2010. So you can say like the bridge was really shaped by the fact that it was surrounding this river. In Shanghai, the theme of the World Expo was Better City, Better Life. So we designed the Danish pavilion as a demonstration of all of the elements that make Copenhagen more sustainable, but that also make it more enjoyable, almost like a manifestation of hedonistic sustainability. So we designed it complete with the blue bicycle lanes of Copenhagen. And Copenhagen was the first city in the world that had a system of free city bikes. So we brought it to China in 2010 so the Chinese could experience the thrill of riding a bike through the city instead of being stuck in a traffic jam. It also made it the perfect museum for impatient people, because you could do the whole thing in 5 minutes on a bike. At the heart of the pavilion, we brought the harbor bath, sort of allowing the Chinese to experience how clean, if not how cold, Danish harbor water is. And finally, we thought, how can we get the Chinese to come? And in the Chinese public school curriculum, they have 3 fairy tales by Hans Christian Andersen, the Danish fairy tale writer. One of them is the story of the Little Mermaid, the national symbol of Denmark. So we proposed to bring the actual mermaid to China for 6 months. I had to go to Parliament and argue that it was a good idea, and as you can see, we got her. Then we had to get her through Chinese customs. And finally she made it to the pavilion. But then we thought, in her absence, we invited Ai Weiwei to make an installation, and he installed a Chinese surveillance camera in the pavilion that was transmitting a live TV feed to a giant screen he mounted where she would normally sit, so all the tourists that would go in vain could see that she was fine. She was just in China. He called it the Mermaid Exchange because for 6 months it was the only uncensored live TV footage from China to the rest of the world. Then actually after that we didn't really build in China until 2020 when we got invited to look at making an art museum in Suzhou as part of the Jinji Lake District. It was going to be right next to this Ferris wheel. Suzhou is actually the cradle of the Chinese garden. It's also the hometown of IMP. But somehow this is where the Chinese garden comes from. So because we're part of this park, we thought of the museum almost like a Chinese infinity knot. Pavilions interconnected with covers and passageways. It's located right next to a Ferris wheel. And in the beginning we were quite annoyed by the Ferris wheel, but you see, this is a building a photo of the building under construction. It opens in April next year. But somehow, like this kind of series of pavilions with sculpture yards in between, it creates a porosity so you can actually pass from the city all the way out to the lake. You can see like the benefit of the Ferris wheel. Once we digested the fact that the Ferris wheel was there, it gave us a perfect argument to make the roof incredibly nice, because it's really going to be the fifth facade that everybody that goes in the Ferris wheel is going to look down on it. So it almost becomes this kind of porous, it's essentially the exhibition program organized into individual pavilions and connected with these little galleries, also extending all the way into the lake. And just because, we're currently rushing to finish the building. I have an absurd amount of photos from it, but in between, it starts creating this kind of feeling that even though every floor plan is 90 degrees only, everything is orthogonal, it's quite rational, but because you have these kind of gently curving roofs, it actually produces a very complex sort of an outdoor gallery, an indoor gallery, like various kinds of gardens. Eventually there'll be a lot of outdoor sculpture. And you have this kind of interplay between the man-made and the natural. Once you go inside, the gallery spaces are incredibly rational, sort of very, very simple. Everything is like orthogonal. But the roofs, again, become these kind of, they have this kind of lazy, drapey feeling, and you end up having these kind of clear stories that bring light in from various directions. So even though the building is very rational, it has this kind of elegance to it, and you constantly, as you pass from one gallery to the next, you look out into the garden around you. So I think it's going to be like a great experience where the rationality of the galleries still somehow coexist with the identity and the character of the museum. Maybe a last museum. This is one of my favorite photos because it's a photo of all of the richest people in Denmark and me. It's the family that makes Lego. And they invited us to do the home of the Lego brick in the hometown of Lego. And of course, the architecture model is made out of Lego. A Lego minifigure is 1 to 50 and roughly proportioned like I am. And this is the final result. We tried to imagine an architecture that would be as inviting and engaging as Lego is itself. So the roof is complete with these kind of interconnected playgrounds where you are allowed to hang out without a ticket. You can climb some of the bricks melt almost and provide access. The building is also open in all directions, so you can enter into the Lego Square, where the galleries above are pulled apart, so daylight and air comes down to the Lego Square. Again, you can roam around freely without a ticket. And only when you ascend into the galleries do you need a ticket. But at this point, it may be the only museum in the world where you are encouraged to touch all the artifacts. Because Lego is not a toy. It's a tool that empowers the child to create his or her own world and to inhabit that world through play, and to invite her friends in joining her in co-creating and cohabiting that world. And that is essentially what architecture is all about, that as human beings, and especially as architects, we have the opportunity to imagine what kind of world we would like to live in, and then to create and co-create and cohabit that world. It almost like leads me back to the Danish word for design is formgivning, which literally means form giving, because to design something is to give form to that which has not yet been given form. In other words, to give form to the future, because when you're designing a building or a place or a space, you're giving form to the world, or at least a little fragment of the world that you would like to find yourself living in the future. And of course, this can be in the extreme. We're actually working with NASA and a company called ICON on designing the technology to build the first permanent human habitat on the south pole of the moon, using military-grade solar-powered lasers to melt moon dust. This is lunar regolith into a form of obsidian. And in 2028, NASA is going to land a laser printer manufactured by ICON, and they're going to make essentially a paver. And if it passes the tests, it should unlock the funding to create a permanent habitat for 4 astronauts to spend 30 days missions on the moon. So essentially, and one of the things is radiation. So all of the water for consumption and bathing is stored in the walls of the bedrooms, because the hydrogen in water is a very good shield against radiation. And then, of course, there's a lounge, because the same side of the moon is always facing Earth. So there's the Earth lounge to prevent homesickness. When you sit in the Earth lounge, you can always see Earth. But a completely other dimension, which is more near Earth, is a project that I've been spending the last 2 years of my life working on with the government of Bhutan. I met the king of Bhutan, the gentleman to the right, when he came to England for the coronation of King Charles, and then he came and stopped by in Copenhagen, and I had dinner with him, and he said, "Come to Bhutan. I want to make a city, because even though we do a lot of things well in Bhutan, you know, it's the most sustainable country in the world. They sequester twice as much carbon as they emit, 82% forest cover. But they have a problem that the young generations are going to Australia or Canada in pursuit of economic opportunities. So he wanted to create a city on the border to India that could attract international investment to retain local talent and give them economic opportunity at home. Bhutan is very different from Denmark. Bhutan is probably the most mountainous country in the world, in the Himalayas. It's sandwiched between India and China. One of the main landmarks is the Tiger's Nest, this incredible temple nested on the side of a mountain. In Denmark, the only mountain is the one that we did. The two countries are actually the same size. Both are powered by renewable energy. Denmark, it's wind. It's hydroelectricity from all the rivers in Bhutan. And in Denmark is often ranked the happiest country in the world. And in Bhutan, they measure their success as a nation in a gross national happiness index. And the gross national happiness index is based on 9 parameters that are all based on these kind of Vajrayana Buddhist principles. And we thought, like, why don't we take those principles and we bake them into the design principles of the city? So, respecting the natural environment, provide mixed income housing, foster spirituality, strengthen community, etc. So imagine the mindfulness city as a city that is like shaped by the rivers that flow through it. It is in the sloping plains at the base of the Himalayas. So there's 34 rivers flowing through the site. It actually enhances nature and agriculture rather than displacing it. It's powered by the flow of the rivers that flow through it. It's designed for collaboration and togetherness, and it's designed to attract international businesses and investment to retain local talent. So imagine sort of the whole city is powered by a dam that we're designing. I'll return to this. In the highlands, in the north of the city, you have sort of hospitality. You can enjoy the tropical nature and the mountains. You have various kinds of education, spirituality, meditation, mindfulness. You have agro-technology, forestry, modern ways of agriculture and forestry. Then you start getting more to the kind of the dense European scale city where you have education, business, and public functions. And finally, you have a dry port with trains that connect into India and an airport that connects to the rest of the world. Right now, there's only 7 pilots in the world that can land in Paro in Bhutan, because you have to kind of nosedive down between the mountains. Once we finish the Gelefu airport, you can actually reach Bhutan from 5 billion people. It could almost become a gateway to South Asia. And we designed it so it could be built with local materials and in a modular way, so that as the city expands, it can expand gradually without becoming a kind of Frankenstein of terminals. The city, the whole territory of the special administrative region is 2,500 square kilometers. It's 82% forest. And we actually bring the forest down all the way to the airport along the rivers. So as a way to capture the identity of where you're arriving, you arrive in a forest. The sort of arrival is shaded by tropical trees. And we continue the forest into the rainforest courtyard. So when you're going through customs or passport or waiting for your luggage, you're next to a forest. We try to somehow emanate. Bhutan has a very strong identity and a very sort of strong culture. So the kind of modularity of the airport somehow evokes the traditional roofs of Bhutan. And they have 8 large schools that educate carvers and stonemasons and painters. So we are literally combining hand-carved and CNC milled ornamentation to the structure. So even though the building is kind of contemporary and modern, it is kind of rooted and feels undeniably Bhutanese. For us, this has been a huge leap to even get the idea to work with ornamentation like this. But somehow, because all the crafts are still alive, it's not pastiche. It is really the living, breathing Bhutanese culture as it is today. So the lounges overlook the mountains over the rainforest courtyard. And when you arrive, this is the first impression you get as you kind of wait for your suitcase. You're standing in the forest. I like to say that the biggest problem could be that people don't want to leave the airport. But The city then is, like I say, it's shaped by the rivers. And the rivers, they provide nutrition for the agriculture, but they also provide migration for the elephants. Oops. I hope you saw the elephants. Three elephants walking from Bhutan to India. So we basically preserve the rivers by making them like long linear central parks. Then we have smaller parks, like community parks. You have seasonal rains. So like you have this kind of gravitational water management using the smaller parks. Then we terrace the city like almost like rice fields. And the city densifies as it gets closer and closer to India. Then the main transportation corridors run east-west, and every time a major street crosses the river, it becomes a public building. So this is phase one, where you can see there's already an existing village. And here you can see how the neighborhoods are kind of shaped by the flow of the water. It's built with locally sourced materials, river rocks, rammed earth, various kinds of timber, bamboo, paved with a permeable pavement so the seasonal rains can penetrate into the ground. And we've developed this kind of architectural language that combines the craft and the existing traditions, but providing accommodation for a more modern form of living. The public space, the ground floor is always open to the public. The schools can take advantage of the public space, so you see teaching and activity as you move around the city. Higher up, people live among the rice fields. You have the kind of tourism, spirituality, hot springs. And essentially, the system is really designed around water management. So the rivers have very seasonal level changes, so we need to somehow contain them to contain the elephants on one side and the humans on the other, because they're wild elephants. So you have this kind of public programs. On the kind of human side, you also have canals for kayaking, you have pools, you have habitat for wildlife, so it becomes a major resource for the people living there. The smaller parks are seasonal, so they become little creeks in the rainy season. So the seasons really become part of the public space. And lastly, I mentioned the bridges. Each bridge is also a program. So you have a Vajrayana Buddhist center where you can cross the river and listen to the teachings of spiritual masters. A healthcare bridge that bridges from one side to the other, but also Western and Eastern medicine. A university, you can imagine a kid walking to school in the morning and imagining what he or she wants to become when she grows old. An agricultural bridge, a market bridge, a manufacturing bridge. And of course, they're going to have traditional songs and stupas and temples. I already mentioned we're designing like 3 landmarks. Of course, the airport, but then also a Vajrayana museum that is built with all the elements you would find in a temple or in a stupa, but more as an introduction. So if you are not a practicing Buddhist, you might not feel welcome in a temple, but here you can sort of enter and understand all the different aspects of the practice of Vajrayana Buddhism, but without disturbing anyone in prayer. And then lastly, the last project, I mentioned it in the beginning, the whole city is powered with water power, renewable energy. And we're designing the bridge using the kind of traditional colors, like this kind of pigmented concrete elements, almost like a Bhutanese interpretation of an Indian stepwell, so that you can actually descend down the face of the dam. Anyone who's been to the Hoover Dam has imagined how cool it would be to rappel down the face. But here you can actually hike down to a temple, like a contemporary interpretation of the tiger's nest that is nested on the face of the dam. And in many ways, the dam is like this kind of utopian pragmatism, it somehow turns engineering into an art form. It turns the forces of nature into a source of power, but it also turns, let's say, the infrastructure for energy into the infrastructure for spirituality. So in many ways, I hope that the Temple Dam it somehow captures all of the values that we have tried to bake into the city. It's a piece of pragmatic infrastructure, but it has this kind of utopian aspiration. So I would really hope that the Temple Dam could become for Bhutan what the Eiffel Tower is for France, or the Sydney Opera is for Australia. So maybe with the Temple Dam as the final image, and a kind of little monument for utopian pragmatism, you can now have a weekend. Thank you.
Bueno, thank you, Bjarke. Gracias a todos los conferencistas. Y bueno, felicidades sobre todo a ustedes, sobre todo los que están desde la mañana, han resistido 13 conferencias. Muchas felicidades.
12 horas casi seguidas de actividades que no terminan aquí. Nos vemos mañana a las 9 de la mañana en la Plaza Tolsá, donde vamos a inaugurar el recorrido por los pabellones, las instalaciones del espacio público de Mextrópoli. Después, no olviden su programa de mano, hay distintas mesas de diálogo, seguimos inaugurando exposiciones, ciclo de cine, presentación de libros, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. Hasta un karaoke por ahí. Entonces, los esperamos. Y, obviamente, mientras salen y para despedirnos, agradecer a quienes hacen posible este evento, a la Secretaría de Cultura a través de su programa de Profes, de apoyo a festivales, al Fondo Mixto de Promoción Turística de la Ciudad de México, al Instituto Ramón Llull, a la Embajada de los Países Bajos, al British Council, Acción Cultural Española, la Embajada de Dinamarca y Fundación Japón. También a nuestras sedes, el Colegio de San Ildefonso, el Museo de la Ciudad de México, a Laguna, el Centro Cultural España, el Museo de Arte Popular, el Museo Experimental El Eco, el Museo Franz Mayer y, por supuesto, al Teatro de la Ciudad de México. También a las universidades, que mañana inauguran muchos de sus pabellones. Los estudiantes han estado trabajando arduamente estos días bajo el sol, lluvia, etcétera. A la Facultad de Arquitectura de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, la Universidad Marista de Mérida, el Instituto Superior de Arquitectura y Diseño de Chihuahua, el Tecnológico de Monterrey, la Anáhuac Ciudad de México, la Ibero Ciudad de México, Centro y la UDEM. También a nuestras marcas aliadas, Softwood, Naturgy, Micmac, Firenze, Lutron, Sempanel, Holcim, Redwood Arboreal, Interceramic, Panel Rey, Figueras, Cres. Otros aliados importantísimos como Factor Eficiencia, al Grupo Habita, 2X Lager, Desarrolladora Belt, Reurbano, Península, Alems Masharif, Cholo, Tequila 1800, Casa del Agua, ATM Espectaculares, Comex y algunos aliados de creativos como José Lo Maderista, Difuso, Obra Blanca Expo, Proyector Cities Connection Project, Asociación de Jóvenes Arquitectos de Cataluña, a la UIA y su Congreso Mundial que tendrá lugar en Barcelona en 2026, a Liga, a Illuminet, Meirlo, Batón Corona, Micropolitan Studio, Cool Hunter México, Arch Daily, Metropolis Magazine, Time Out y por supuesto Arquine y a todo el equipo que ha estado trabajando. Ahora sí, gracias.
Hasta mañana.
Con esto concluimos el día de hoy. Gracias a nuestras y nuestros conferencistas, a nuestras alianzas y sobre todo a ustedes por acompañarnos. Les invitamos a continuar con nuestro programa en los siguientes días de Mextrópoli 2025. Si utilizaron el servicio de interpretación, les pedimos devolver los equipos de traducción en la recepción del Teatro de la Ciudad Esperanza Iris antes de salir. Esto es la 12ª edición de Mextrópoli 2025. Gracias por vivir con nosotros la ciudad extraordinaria. Buenas noches.